Great. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Rice University's second annual lecture series commemorating Juneteenth. We're glad you're here with us today to explore the ideas and questions central to Juneteenth, which began just down the road in Galveston on June 19th, 1865. On that day, 156 years ago, U.S. General Major Gordon Granger issued General Order Number 3, which informed the people of Texas that all enslaved people were now free. The order came 2.5 years after President Lincoln's historic Emancipation Proclamation. Since then, communities across the nation have held celebrations on or around June 19th to commemorate the end of slavery. Today's program, Juneteenth and Emancipations to Come, will observe that historic and joyous day, but will also look forward and how we can all work towards creating a more diverse and inclusive community at Rice in Houston and beyond. Rice launched a lecture series last year with the goal in mind and in hopes of beginning a process of reflection and discussion on the history of racial injustice. In addition to the lecture series, Rice has embarked on several other efforts focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. These efforts include enhanced diversity training for staff, students, and faculty, targeted research funds and extracurricular support for faculty and students in areas related to equity and anti-racism, and the initiative of a scholar in residence program meant to facilitate creative discourse around issues related to racial justice. We continue to work towards a faculty that is reflective of our community and society at large. The last two classes of faculty, that which came in fall of 2020 and that coming in this fall, are amongst the most diverse ever, with nearly 25% of our faculty coming from underrepresented groups. Last July, the university named its first vice provost for diversity, equity, and inclusion, history professor and Rice alumnus Alex Bird, who is credited for organizing today's program. In this role, Alex provides high-level strategic leadership for diversity initiatives and coordinates offices across the campus to help create one point of responsibility for all programs and efforts around diversity. He, along with Caleb McDaniel, chairman of Rice's history department, also co-chair the university's task force on slavery, segregation, and racial injustice. Commissioned in 2019 by President Lebron, the task force is charged with investigating Rice's past with respect to slavery, segregation, and racial injustice, encouraging frank and honest discussion about the past, and identifying suggestions for Rice's future. Today's program will conclude with an update from Alex and Caleb on their task force work and some of their findings and recommendations. Prior to that, we will hear from talks from Rice faculty on engineering for Black lives and on Blackness for future freedoms, all of which will be informative, thought-provoking, and action-inducing. We hope you enjoyed today's lecture series and encourage you to share your feedback and ideas. Before I conclude, I want to thank Alex for organizing this event and for all the faculty speakers who took the time and effort to share their unique perspective on this holiday and how we can move forward. I want to thank Adrian Rumi, who will chair the discussion on the task force on slavery, segregation, and racial injustice. And a special thank you to our recent graduate, Danny Perdue, who has returned to participate in this morning's panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Provost DesRoches. Good morning, everyone. I am Faye Yarbrough, and I'm happy to welcome you, if only virtually, to Rice University for today's program. I'm an associate dean in the School of Humanities, and I'm also a professor in the Department of History. I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel, Engineering for Black Lives. So first, I will introduce very briefly our three panelists. They will each speak for about 10 minutes. And then we'll open things up for Q&A. So I encourage you, if at any point you have a question, to use the Q&A function to ask your question. And then at the end of the three presentations, I will try to get through as many of those questions as I can with our panelists. So our first speaker today will be Dr. Danny Perdue, who is a recent graduate in mechanical engineering from Rice University. Congratulations to Dr. Perdue. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of Pittsburgh, and at Rice, Dr. Perdue founded the Mechanical Engineering Graduate Student Association and served as the president of the Black Graduate Student Association. She also served as the first vice president of Equity and Inclusion in the Graduate Student Association. Our next speaker will then be Dr. Ilya Higgs, who is a professor of Computational and Applied Mathematics, who holds degrees from Texas State University and Rice University. He is a fellow for the Institute for Operations Research and Management Science and serves as the faculty advisor to Rice University's undergraduate chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers and to the Black Graduate Student Association at Rice. And then our final speaker this morning will be Dr. Fred Higgs III. He is Rice University's Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and the John and Ann Dorr Professor of Mechanical Engineering. Dr. Higgs also directs the Rice Center for Engineering Leadership. He holds degrees from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and taught at Carnegie Mellon University before coming to Rice. He is a fellow of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. So, Dr. Perdue, please take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that introduction. That was lovely. Okay, so the title of my talk, my segment is Emancipated, Assimilated, and Still Motivated. I was asked to talk about my life as an engineer and as a newly minted PhD. So thank you, Dr. Bird, for allowing me to share my story. For the sake of this talk, I have decided to oversimplify some engineering terms. So that's my disclaimer. In engineering, we talk a lot about conditions. A boundary condition, for those who may not know, pretty much means that there is a boundary like the line you see whenever you draw a circle. So if a data point falls inside that circle or the boundary, it is useful to your calculation. We could also say that the condition has been met. If the data point falls outside of the circle, the computer assigns the data point an artificially low value. I'm going to say that one more time. If the data point falls outside of the circle, the computer assigns the data point an artificially low value. And it recognizes that the data point is outside of the boundary or area that's being used to perform the calculation. And it figures out how to shift it to a different spot. As you can imagine, boundary conditions can change based on the type of problem you're trying to solve. But at the core, math is math. There are laws that mathematicians have discovered and proclaimed to be true, that no matter the condition you set, if it's a circle, a square, an octagon, math is math. It may be complicated, but the laws of mathematics at its core hold true. So how does this relate to Juneteenth? To say the conditions of Black slaves were brutal is an understatement. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, stating that slaves in the states that rebelled against the United States are forever free. Although the condition changed, slaves found themselves outside of the boundary where that proclamation would be useful. It took 2.5 years for the news to reach Texas that the condition of freedom for those slaves had been met. But white people made freedom itself conditional. No eating where whites ate, no going to schools where whites went, no living in neighborhoods where whites lived, and no voting, which unfortunately still sounds familiar. When a Black person met the same criteria as a white person that would permit them to exist within the boundary, white people assigned them an artificially low value to that person and decided that they no longer met the conditions. So were the freed slaves truly emancipated? So let's relate this back to engineering. The thing that's tough about conditions is that they change or they don't apply to the situation. If I assign boundary conditions to a 2-dimensional object, these conditions may not hold for a 3-dimensional object, but that doesn't mean I can't solve the problem. It just means I need to think about it differently to ensure that the math makes sense, because math is math. It may be complicated, but the laws of mathematics at its core hold true. So now I would like to share a little bit about my life and explain how all of this is connected. I grew up in a place called Cranberry Township, which is about 25 minutes north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My boundary was a predominantly white school where in my graduating class of 700, there were only 10 Black kids. I had to learn how to be useful outside of that boundary since I was almost always the only Black person in my class. And when I got to AP Physics, I was one of 2 girls in my class. I didn't know this at the time, but I used assimilation as a tool to shift my data point back into the boundary. I had straight hair, I tried to wear popular brands of clothes, but the essence of who I am drew me to want to play the trumpet like Miles Davis and Dizzy Gillespie. When I tried to express the smallest bit of myself as being a Black girl and proud of it, I paid for it. I was mocked for playing a boy's instrument. And one student decided to give me a slave name. He called me Tabitha and told everyone that I smelled like gazelles and zebras every time I walked into the band room. Despite this, by senior year, I was first trumpet in jazz band, and I became the president of my high school marching band of 300 students. I felt like I mastered assimilation with a 3.987 GPA, a leadership award, and acceptance into Georgia Tech, Ohio State, and the University of Pittsburgh. Then I got to college, and the boundary conditions changed. Assimilation in this sense was me removing my Blackness to make white people feel comfortable. When I got to college, I learned that it's okay to show my Blackness, most frequently around Black students in the National Society of Black Engineers or Black Action Society, or in my historically Black sorority. Contrastly, I learned how to take off my Blackness in my fluid dynamics class, my thermodynamics class, my heat and mass transfer class. And why? Why did I do this? Because I was the only Black student among a sea of white students, of whom were mostly men. Now, stay with me, because here's where the math gets complicated. Under one set of criteria, I fell inside the boundary conditions. And under another, I fell outside of those boundary conditions. But I was the same person the whole time. This left me with a feeling of unworthiness. When I fell outside of the boundary conditions, typically that was when I was in class. I felt that I had been assigned a very low value. The feeling of unworthiness burrowed into my soul so deep that I felt it even when I was around Black friends. I felt it all the time, and I really wanted it to stop. So to be completely honest with you, I decided to get a PhD, in part because I thought no one could ever say or act like I didn't have value with those 3 letters behind my name. I didn't realize it at the time, but my goal was total and complete assimilation. But could I ever truly assimilate? However, when I started graduate school, I still felt unworthy to be amongst these brilliant academics. I felt unworthy to claim that I attended a school that carried the high level of prestige that Rice does. I inadvertently isolated myself, and I determined that the new boundary conditions I was now under would only apply if I became what I was not. I thought I could choose to opt out of the life that I thought would assign me a low value. It wasn't until my fourth year of graduate school that I realized that these conditions do not define who I am. At my core, I'm a person, I'm a human. It was true that I was a human in high school, although boundary conditions changed. And it was true that I was a human in undergrad, although those boundary conditions changed again. And it was again true that I was a human in graduate school, even though the boundary conditions changed. Recall what I said about how boundary conditions change. A 2-dimensional object and a 3-dimensional object have different boundary conditions, but math is math. It may be complicated, but the laws of mathematics at its core hold true. And in my case, I had to realize and make others around me realize that humans are humans. My conditions changed in high school and college and graduate school, but the essence of who I am remained the same. I may be complicated, but who I was born to be and my life purpose will always be true. Due to centuries of slavery and an uphill battle to emancipation, after years of unsuccessful assimilation, I have found a new motivation. My motivation is to be 100% me all of the time, no matter the boundary conditions or the external environment around me. And during this season of celebration, I hope you all remember to celebrate yourselves and to be motivated to be you. If you are like how I was and still find yourself in a place of so low self-worth, Here are 4 tips I learned from a great talk from Dr. Adria Gooden, the former director of the Clinic and Community Programs at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. This is what you need to do. Step 1 is to forgive yourself, accept your shortcomings, and move on. I've done this by refocusing on the positives that were intertwined with a lot of negatives. Step 2 is to practice self-acceptance. Quiet the judgmental chatterbox in your brain that makes up stories of what other people think of you, and decide that what you think of yourself every day is the only opinion that matters. Step 3 is a reminder to be there for yourself when life gets hard. Kicking yourself when you're down only makes it worse. Lastly, and what I think is most important, step 4 is to connect with supportive people who will remind you how worthy you are. I turned 30 in July, and it's been a long, hard, and scary journey to unlearn the self-deprecating behavior that I clung to because it was scary to accept me for me whenever others didn't. But now I have the motivation to live a life that is free and liberated from the tyranny of outsiders' perspectives. I have a passion to help others find this path as well, especially in engineering. I no longer choose to operate within the confines of my perceived boundary conditions. I am who I am. You are who you are. And we may be complicated, but the laws of humanity at its core hold true. You deserve to be and achieve anything that is rooted in the essence of who you are. Thank you.
Okay, so my talk is more about how you can use engineering for Black life. So this is me in high school, right? I did play trumpet, Danny, so I was, well, okay, up to about 10th grade. Then I had to focus more on football. But, you know, as you can tell, it's crazy. Okay, that's me in high school. I was about to do something, but that's cool. All right, I'm originally from Waco, Texas. I had a football scholarship at Texas State University, Southwest Texas State. Then I got a PhD from Rice. Then I taught at Texas A&M in industrial engineering, and now I'm back at Rice. So I just really kind of just stayed in Texas. My particular research is actually called operations research. And so I'm gonna really kind of define that. I'm gonna talk about student examples of OR for Black life. We'll talk about my examples of OR for Black life, and then talk about what Juneteenth means for me. Let's see. Okay, so operations research originally started in World War II, and it was basically kind of using math to do the military planning for the British. So it's basically using science, logic, mathematics to come up with decisions for everyday things. It's used extensively in the industry world. Most times operations research is in the industrial engineering department at other universities. At this university is under Computational and Applied Mathematics. And a shameless plug is that we have a new major in OR starting this fall. Oh, but at the heart of the matter, basically operations research is basically a desire to improve the world around us, okay? And so there's some podcasts I just put in listed here on the slides. So let's talk about student examples of social good for OR, right? So recently, this is basically the D2K spring projects from this spring. There were 3 projects related to operations research for kind of social good. One was Houston Equity, and they were basically trying to create a metric to evaluate neighborhood equity. Another team called Team Heat was basically trying to identify neighborhoods to improve the green space in those neighborhoods to eventually cool the neighborhood down by kind of like urban forestry. And then the third one is Team Houston Fire Department. They were basically trying to optimize the response of the fleet for emergency responses. Instead of, so if you're hurt, don't send a fire truck, send an ambulance. And they try to make sure that that happens. So in terms of another group, so this is the country of Malawi, and these are the people of Malawi. And so I mentored a a senior design project back in, I guess it was back in maybe 2010, 2012. And the students were Amber Kunkel, Elizabeth Van Dentelli, and Duo Wu. And basically they designed a logistics plan of how to distribute these health surveillance assistants. So a health surveillance assistant is basically, they go from village to village and with their medical backpack and try to render aid to the different villages. And then it's almost like a traveling salesman problem where they'll visit the villages and then come back to their home base. So we had to design, where do they go? We had to design who, we had to pair, we had to allocate the personnel to those particular distribution centers. And then we also had to design the distribution of the backpacks. So the backpacks were actually created a part of the work of Rebecca Richards-Quortham. And so it was a great way to kind of use optimization, operations research to improve the Black lives of Malawi. Okay, in terms of my own research, right? Here's my Aunt Bunny, okay? I love Aunt Bunny. I used to, me and my other first cousins, we used to get on our knees so we can just be a little bit taller than Aunt Bunny. So, but unfortunately, Aunt Bunny passed away of breast cancer back in 2002. So that kind of encouraged me, like, what can I do in a way to kind of look at ways that OR can help with cancer, breast cancer. And so I had worked with some people, I forgot when the paper was done, but we basically did research on how to schedule adjuvant or hormonal treatment for postmenopausal patients of early breast cancer. And so for me, that was fulfilling, right? Because in a way, I couldn't help my Aunt Bunny, but in a way I helped other people in relation to my Aunt Bunny. And next is everybody's know about ERCOT. And actually the picture on the left is related to the big black outage, black outage of 2003. So recently I came up with, recently it was published a paper that me and my student did on actually where to place these phase measurement units on the electrical grid to ensure that there are no outages. And the current work is here. If you can see my arrow, and then the red column is the work that me and my student did, and we actually show. So this is like the only table with numbers on it. So I try to be a really good, it's not an X-rated or X variable type of talk. It's a more G-rated. And you can tell from the red column that, we saw things pretty fastly, even for a grid with over 9,000 something units. And then future work actually got a bridge grant from Rice to actually look at equitable redistribution or redistricting for Texas, or actually any kind of political redistricting. But that's somewhat in the works at the moment. And to finish, let me talk about what Juneteenth means to me. Okay, so the picture on the left is actually my great grandfather, Moses Evans. Moses Evans was a member of the 53rd Colored Infantry. So this is the Mississippi Volunteer Colored Infantry. So he joined the Union, right, and fought in the Civil War. The infantry was created probably in 1863. So he joined the Union and fought in the Civil War, coming from Mississippi. So most likely he was born a slave, but he fought for his freedom and he fought for the freedom of others. The picture on the right is actually a voter registration roll from 1867. It includes my great-great-grandfather, Lewis Gooden, but I also found a role for my other great-great-grandfather, Frederick the Great. And it kind of shows that, after 1865, they did the best they could to try to vote, And the interesting story about Frederick the Great is that his family, him and most of his family, they were owned by the Langs in Mississippi, where they moved them to Texas to try to keep them as slaves. But once they became free, they changed their name from Lang to the Great. And so the Great family also includes the guy that made the painting for Barack Obama. I forgot his name, but Kende Wiley, I think that's his name. But he's also a member of the Great family, and that was on Finding Your Roots. But that's it for me. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Higgs. And so our final speaker this morning is Dr. Higgs. And I want to apologize. I had a little bit of what we can all relate to, Wi-Fi difficulties, but Dr. Higgs, take it away.
Okay, thank you. I see Faye is smiling, so I can be heard. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm also a mechanical engineer, like Danny, but I'm going to show you my basic journey to becoming a tenure professor and what we work on to try to produce more Black tenure professors in the context of just producing really strong students. But because this is Juneteenth, I'm going to sprinkle in some perspectives of what the Black professor runs into in kind of real time as it goes on. So these are normally comments behind the scenes that I would not normally show there. So I will say that I am from Tallahassee, Florida, and I grew up, we called it the 20th of May. So you all in this region got the message a little late. We got it, we got the good news on the 20th of May. So our celebrations are called, hey, you're going down to the 20th of May celebration. And I never heard of Juneteenth until I moved to Rice a few years ago there. So first, the becoming parts there. So this is me, and you can imagine I came from some people, and this is who they are. I'm Cecil Fred Higgs III. This is my father, Cecil Fred Higgs II, or Jr., and this is his wife, who's my mother there. So just like you all, I have a proud set of parents who are bragging about me. And now I should say that my father he has several degrees on the social science side. My mother has several degrees on the humanities and music side there. My father's a first generation college graduate, and my mother's a third generation HBCU graduate, making me a fourth generation HBCU graduate. But here's my mother's father, who was my grandfather. Those of you who have seen my emails, you'll see me with a quote from him. He was an entrepreneur, and he was one of the two big Christian Black pastors in the city. I should say two big churches in Tallahassee. But because he was an entrepreneur and really into laying down paths, he ran for Congress in Tallahassee. He didn't win. He was the first Black person to run for Congress. My mother's only sister, and my grandfather's daughter, is the first Black woman to graduate from Florida State University. And even though my mother went to Florida A&M University, which is in Tallahassee, and her sister's only 1 year younger than her, she chose to go to Florida State, where she knew there would be heck to pay in terms of socially. So that always baffled me that she knew my mom had a great college experience in the same city, and my grandfather still convinced her to be the first Black woman and not have a great college experience there. So then I'm the mathematical average of my parents. My mom coming from a civil rights leader, is about justice now, right? And my father is quiet and more measured there. And so I'm kind of the average of that. I don't react right away to things that might occur, whether it's a passive aggressive action or whatever. So then this is me. I came to Rice in 2016, but before then, I did the entire tenure track, assistant to full at Carnegie Mellon. I graduated from Tennessee State University, which is an HBCU, then went to graduate school, then did a postdoc there. And my research actually involves experiments and modeling. So we have a lab. If you walked into it, you think we're pure experimentalists, but we also have computer clusters we build. So we make virtual versions of physical experiments and tests that happen. And this speeds up analysis there. So here you're looking at, say, the virtual design of a geothermal drill bit. And then we use this technique called machine learning to speed it up. So basically, it takes a lot of time to run these computer simulations. And we could take a few of those results, put them through machine learning, augment the number of data points, and now we could create a very simple map that tells a 3D printer engineer what knobs to turn to 3D print this particular bit there. And we do that, we work in a lot of different research sectors. We call it beams: biotech, energy, additive manufacturing, nanotech, and space. There. Recently, we've produced, we've submitted several patents through Rice that are now applications there. And it's all about this Industry 4.0 perspective where the physical and the virtual are being merged together to get results. But I did want to just hone in on this machine learning piece, because I know you've heard about this piece of artificial intelligence, which is the umbrella theme. Machine learning is a particular part of it. Basically, you could take in data from something and you operate on that data with this hidden middle layer there, they call it the hidden layer. And then from that, you can get a certain output. So for example, you can take in information about an object, do some math operations on it, and then the computer can say, hey, that object was a cat there. And that's basically what machine learning is. That might pop up a little bit later in this presentation. When I started off as a professor, I was looking to see what was my overall plan going to be. And so I made this engine. You heard about Danny talk about thermodynamics. Well, thermodynamics, I teach thermodynamics, at least I taught it at the beginning. And so I made this engine. Any mechanical engineer knows that you basically are going around here, and your energy output is there. You can come around here, pump some working fluid, go around, move around there. And this is my overall vision there. So the main takeaway here was that my output from the lab was going to be papers, PhDs, professors, and other professionals, right? So the 4 Ps there. At the same time, I felt I needed to impact my community. And so I was going to work with a certain high school there in Pittsburgh, create a future generation of engineers there, work with the Urban League and everything, and then go around, have some HBCUs I was working around with. And this was just a big plan that I was going to integrate research, education, community impact. I had a friend, a Black professor, the only other engineering Black professor, who said, man, you're crazy. You got to leave all that service alone. I'm there. And it was a sad moment for me, but I did scale back on that. Now, if he had been maybe a white professor, I might have said, hey, he's trying to make me forget my community. This is a Black professor saying, you're not going to be any good to anyone if you don't make it through, become a world-class scholar, and then get tenured there. So that's a little input I wouldn't normally get. So I can simplify things. The professor is trying to master this TRF cycle, at least in engineering. Services included, but service is not as big as these other things here. So you have this cycle here, and effectively you do a good job teaching, then some of those motivated students will come to your lab to do research. They'll do good research for you, and now you can generate results and get funding use the funding to then bring in more students, and then it comes back around to teaching. So all of this centers around students and making sure you treat them well, and that you're constantly looking to mentor them. And so I did want to talk about what we've done in terms of, I became a tenured professor, but how do you produce Black PhDs who might ultimately go on to become professors? Let me just show you a quick snippet in time here. I call it the Thermo 6. I was teaching thermodynamics maybe my second time, and a young Black mechanical engineer came to my office and did not really bring any notes. He asked me some questions, and I said, is there more? I mean, you didn't really bring any notes, and you're just kind of asking me these open-ended questions. He said, no, I just, I haven't had a Black professor, so I just wanted to be in your presence. And I said, okay. I said, well, look, I see you got a lot of, Black and brown friends, and you guys sit in the back. You need to start sitting on the front row and tell them to come back to my office next time. I was only a second year in. And so they came back to my office, and I said, look, you guys want to make real impact, you need to get a PhD in engineering. You can go on and get a seat at the table, the decision-making table. So you flip that result. I call them the Thermo 6. In that particular class, these two people here were my first two PhD students. I actually grabbed them from Texas. He was at Texas A&M, he was at the University of Texas. And it was just, I felt they were the top Black students in the nation when I got them. But these are the Thermo 6. Only 5 of them are showing. 4 out of 6 of them went on to get their PhD. I should say Randolph is actually working on his PhD. We lost him. We didn't know where he went. He changed his major. So we thought it was over. But he emailed me since I've been at Rice and said, hey, I haven't forgotten. I'm a PhD in education at Columbia now. So, hey, we were still excited. So, this guy went on to do his PhD. He left to do his PhD under one of my students when he became a professor. This student here went to be a professor at Columbia. He got his PhD, my undergrad. He was the one who came to my office, got his PhD under him there. And so it's interesting that, one professor would be able to make that type of impact from that simple conversation. Now, this is actually a sad story because I did not know I had that impact. I never really spoke like that again to other minorities that I saw. So later on, I realized that it had this impact there. And, other than bringing them in my lab, I didn't have that again. So just having a faculty of color there changes everything. So I want to mention here about the great debate that we were having. And this was, we were going to go to the NSBE conference. And my friend felt that we had to compete against the other schools for these top students, for Black PhD students, or prospects, I should say. I said there's not enough. We should not compete yet. We need all the universities being on our side trying to compete there, and let's go there and just teach the students about the PhD. And so we went, this is a snapshot of the NSBE Career Fair. It's a beast there. And instead of going to the graduate fair, I said we should go to the career fair. That's where all the students are. They don't know about the graduate. Most of them don't know about graduate school, only the most sophisticated. So we set up there and I had something like this. I put together a poster. I got a lot of my friends with PhDs to fill out this profile. It looks something like this. It's my friend Randy Pinkett. Tell me some information about yourself. What do you do? What's your salary? This guy actually ended up being the first Black to win The Apprentice. But the students will come out and see this because you can't see it, right? You can't be it there. We also had these Got PhD buttons, and we gave that to every university. So when students say, hey, what's that button about? You got to teach them about the PhD. So you have different universities with these particular buttons there. And this is how we set up. I came to Rice. We have a pretty paperless booth. It's only about teaching, getting names. You have several students here. Here's one of my students. She was an undergrad in my lab, who my Black PhD student said, hey, she's really good, but she's going to be working at Subway and not doing undergrad research. I convinced her to do research. She went to Duke. I harassed her until she came here to Rice to do a PhD under me. She'll be finishing soon. I recruited him at NSBE. You see Danny right there. This is one of my PhD students here as well. There's Ilya. Ilya needs to get to work here recruiting. There's Saiichi. He's the Nick Saban of recruiting talent, I call him. But now once we get back, we put them in this box. And now I have a video called Why Get a PhD in Engineering. It's really to keep students educated and motivated about getting a PhD so they'll apply. You'll see I made this video here in 2016. I arrived here in 2016. So shortly after arriving here, I got what Saiichi said, we need to put out a video there to keep the pipeline going. So back to enjoying this cycle here, but it gets interrupted sometimes. We don't have a choice here. So you hear in the news about unarmed Black people getting killed there. So I wondered about, is there a pattern here that we can see? Naturally, you have a pattern, you can bring in machine learning, right? I'm gonna bring in several layers. We call this deep learning, right? And see, if you look at these people, some educated, some not, some did a minor theft, some did nothing, some mistaken identity, wrong house, your house, right? All these different things. Is there a pattern we can figure out? I submit to you that there is not a pattern, and this is part of the consternation that Blacks have, because there's not a pattern to this. It means that you cannot do the right thing, and it not happen to you. The other thing that three factors that probably causes a deep concern is there any justice once one of these events happens? And I would say that New York Times did an article some time ago, and they showed that only about 3 of 18 ended up with some type of conviction there. Several of the most prominent ones, right, like Tamir Rice, this little boy looks like my little boy. These officers weren't even charged there. So then the justice question leaves you there. So then it comes the question of, wait a minute now, but in these events, like, are they good guys and bad guys? What about when there's a police officer there? My son wants to be a police officer. My son is 9, he doesn't really understand what happened here yet. I haven't fully told him. We don't know how to work that out yet, right? He wants to be this. We want to tell him, hey, go to the cop if you get in trouble. But if I tell him this, will that confuse him there? And so I would just say a lot of things happen to different demographics of people. But with the police, with the wrongdoings of certain police against Blacks, that's a little different, because now the ground beneath your seat moves, right? Beneath your feet moves. Because you now are wondering, wait a minute, I can go to a police officer here, wait a minute, will this person be against me? And I'm someone who's never had a negative run-in with a police officer, and yet I still do this analysis on there. So when it's a bad guy that assaults people, we understand that. But when it's a police officer, then that actually is a little more confusing out there, and the ground beneath your seat moves. And so I'll end it by talking about this situation here. A young lady said, hey, Professor Higgs, are you doing okay? And I said, sure. It was after this event happened. And so I realized that I need to meet with the students. So we called a session, only 45 minutes. And like a lot of graduate students, Black graduate students from engineering showed up with 45 minutes notice because they were feeling some kind of way. And we had to address that. So when these things happen, your students are affected. Here's some Black twins that I passed on because they were twins. I didn't want to make a mistake in the lab, right? And because of that, I now have new identical twins in my lab. I was ready to recruit them this time. And now this is my lab now. It's pretty diverse. I like to use diversity as an imbalance, right? Like all the Americans want to go home on Friday night. Well, I got some non-Americans who are going to stay in the lab, right? So we use diversity as an imbalance, and we're able to be pretty productive. And I love all of these students, and I mentor them really hard there. But ultimately, the experience of certain students are different than others, and I appreciate your time in hearing about it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Higgs. Okay, so we now are opening things up for Q&A. So again, I'd like to remind the audience that you can use the Q&A tab to ask questions. anyone who's been in a panel with me knows that I cheat and I ask the first questions because I feel like I should have that privilege since I get to moderate the panel. And the problem today is I have a lot of questions. So just an observation that I wanted to make before I get to some of my questions is that it seemed to me there's an interesting through line between all of these presentations, but especially between Dr. Perdue and Dr. Higgs, in that when I really liked your metaphor of this boundary position and things that fall inside have value and things that fall outside get assigned less value. And I couldn't help but think at the end, as you were talking, Dr. Higgs, that you're putting the PhD inside of the circle of value for students, that students don't know why it's a useful thing for them to pursue. And that when you have this display at these conferences, that what you're doing for them is you're taking something that they would assign little value to because they don't know about it, and you're putting it inside of that circle so that they can see what value they can assign to it. So that's just an observation that I was making that kind of nicely connected the two of you together. But feel free to comment on that if you like, but I also have many questions I'd like to ask if you don't want to comment on that.
Danny, did you?
Oh, no, I think that is a fair summary of what, I was saying and what Dr. Higgs was saying. And I think that is true, that it is great that Dr. Higgs is showing people showing Black people how much a PhD has value, and that no one can take that away from you. So yeah, that was great.
Right, so I'm gonna go ahead and jump into some of my questions. So the first question that I have starts with Dr. Perdue. One, because I was really struck by your classmates' really hurtful comments, and I was struck by them in particular because you're young, and right, this is a recent event that this classmate would say these things to you, right? Two, you're in Pittsburgh, right? And people make the assumption that racism is a particularly Southern problem, right? And so here this is right there in Pittsburgh. And so then the third thing connected to it is because we are talking about Juneteenth, and I think a criticism that comes from some quarters about why should we have it as a national holiday is that it's something that has to do with Texas in particular, or with the South in particular. But for me, your story just showed the importance of the meaning of the holiday, and then also the problem of racism as a national phenomenon, not just something that's very specific to the South. So if you could, I know it's a painful, but if you could talk just a little bit more about that it isn't, what you experienced in Pittsburgh wasn't just something, it's not a thing that we tend to think of as something that happened way in the past, or that's just such a Southern thing.
Yeah, definitely. So we have a family friend who lives in Alabama, and her name is Miss Annery. And Miss Annery always said that she's Black, she preferred to live in Alabama because at least the racism was overt. And that she's from Pittsburgh, living in Pittsburgh, it was just covert, and it just drove her crazy. She's like, I want to know if you like me or you don't like me, let's be upfront about it. And I think that she makes a good point, because there were so many times throughout high school specifically that I experienced a lot of covert racism. So whenever I was in a psychology class, I asked my teacher, after months of being in the class and raising my hand and not getting called on, there were 2 other Black girls in my class. And I said after class, like, hey, I just want to know, like, I was talking to Io and Krista, and we realized that we don't get called on in class. And I just wanted to ask if there was a reason, or if like there's something we can do. And he flipped out on me. He got really, really angry at me, started yelling at me in the hallway. How dare you say I'm a racist? And I'm like, yo, I never said that. There was a time where I got screamed at on the bus because I stood up to close the window, and you're not allowed to stand on the bus. Meanwhile, other kids are constantly running around and standing up on the school bus. And so it's disappointing, obviously, right? But I think it's important to recognize that this is a really prevalent issue, and it's something that I hope for it to change, but the only way things change is whenever we bring awareness to things. And so when we have awareness for Black Lives Matter, we have awareness of Juneteenth becoming a federal holiday, it reminds people, hopefully, or educates people that racism is not over. We're not in a post-racial era, that it's not something of the past. It's not only happening in certain locations. Like the protests for George Floyd, they erupted all over the world because there is inequality and injustice. And so I am grateful that it is now a federal holiday. And I do hope that that student has learned the error of his ways, and he doesn't do that to people anymore. But also, I helped create the Black Student Union at my school to help raise awareness of things like that during high school too. So there's always opportunity for education.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hicks or Dr. Higgs, would either of you like to comment on that? I mean, both of you are from Southern states, and if I dare say it, are older than Dr. Perdue. And so if you want to comment on any of those kinds of experiences as well.
I mean, I can speak. Racism is real. You know, we deal with it every day. I remember, so when I give a talk to teachers, I tell them about the experience I had in 9th grade in biology, and we were learning about how the French monks were experimenting with plants and stuff like that, and creating new variations of plants. And I asked the teacher, were there any Black people that did this? And she said, not at that time, they were in Africa playing with sticks. So, you know, we just have to educate ourselves, learn about our history. History didn't begin in America, right? It began in Africa. And we need to learn about that and learn about the accomplishments that have been done. Because we're all great, and we all come from great people, and and those people actually did great things. They did not, I was watching this documentary called How in the Hall, you know, they enslaved very sophisticated people that knew how to plant things and and they enslaved experts. They didn't just enslave people, they enslaved experts. So that's all I'm gonna say on that.
Yes, thank you, Faye, for the question. So, you know, I will say my childhood is a little unique in that I actually went to an HBCU K through 12, and then I left town and went to an HBCU. So, you know, there were incidents, but in general, I was able to, you know, hang around a certain type of educated crowd, educated part of the Black intelligentsia, that I didn't run into serious issues. You know, and I will say that it's probably true for most of us. You know, most of my technical mentors, my professional mentors, were Caucasian. You know, and they were, you know, great to me, and we still are very close to this day. You know, I've been educated now, being at a liberal arts institution now. I understand microaggressions, and I have had those in my career there, and it's not something that I spend time, you know, analyzing too much there. But yes, they certainly happen. So, like here, one of the things I do is I help strengthen the pool of my department, the PhD applicant pool there, and I'll do it for other departments. And you know, sometimes I get you know, questions back like, "Hey, it's after the deadline" or something like this. I'm like, and so I'll just say, "Well, okay," and I don't do any analysis on that particular situation. You just are not included in the process next time. And that's pretty much, unfortunately, my mantra, and that is that I isolated to these incidents to a single person there, and I keep on persisting and looking to build systems that have scalable impact on leveling the playing field for everyone.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Higgs. So we have a question from Jane Grande Allen, who's a faculty member here at Rice. What can we do to instill an interest in the PhD for students at the high school level? And I'm going to tack a question from Akila Mance onto that, which is also for people who aren't in academia but support the work that you all are doing, like alumni, particularly Black alumni. How can we help to support you? Because I think there's a little bit of overlap there. So are there things that any of you imagine would be helpful in thinking about high school students and encouraging them to pursue a PhD later? And then what are the things that folks can do to support your work more broadly?
Yes. So thank you, Jane and Akila. So I'll give like a succinct answer. Definitely, Jane, you see a minority kid doing something great in STEM, whether it's at a science fair or at some type of camp. Make a single, custom, tailored to them compliment and encourage them. Hey, you should do more of that. You should build a career in that. You should get a PhD like me in that. Explain that to them. You make a tailored, a custom comment to that kid. It can be completely transformative. It's that simple. And Akila, thank you. I think Akila's a lawyer. But just it's the similar thing. Of course, you're younger and you've achieved a lot, but STEM certainly there's a dearth of people, different from law school. We have less people that look like you going to get a PhD in engineering. And so once you see a mathematically inclined kid, say, hey, have you considered this? Go check out Ilya Hicks' webpage there. Or if it's a young woman, you might want to put her in contact with Danny. I make that gender point because, when I see Danny's heard me say this, Danny is the minority of minorities, right? It's a Black woman in mechanical engineering. She sees herself less at a conference than any of you. When she walks into a room, her chances of finding someone that looks just like her is much mathematically lower than any other demographic at that conference. So going out of your way uncomfortably and engaging Danny about her poster, her presentation, and giving her a tailored compliment is absolutely transformative. And that's the same at all those different levels from high school up.
I want to piggyback on that because actually, when I came to Southwest Texas State, the dean of undergraduates was over the academic advising for the athletes. So I was on the football scholarship. And when she saw that I had done a perfect score on the AP calculus, she said, you should go to grad school. I was like, ma'am, I just got here. I'm just a freshman. I just got on campus. She was like, no, you should go to grad school. And just that statement made me think, like, when I became a senior, like, maybe I should go to grad school. So the exposure, the compliment, it helps. I believe exposure helps because they need to see people like them in these spaces. But also the compliment helps. Just the suggestion, it can plant a seed in a student's mind. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'll add on quickly that I agree about the exposure piece. In high school, I just knew I needed to get to college, and that was as far as I thought. And then in college, I got all these internships, and I was doing an internship at Marathon Petroleum Company in Findlay, Ohio. And I thought, like, I'm going to work for Marathon. I'm going to work there for 40 years, and I'm going to retire. And that's like the best life I could have. And then I met a student who was getting his PhD, and for some reason, but he didn't tell Marathon that he was getting his PhD. Like, he was like, I'm not letting them know this. because I guess he was like graduating from undergrad and then going to a PhD, but he needed an internship in between. And his name is Joey Daniels, and he's a fantastic person. And he was like, my great grandfather did this XYZ with okay, blah, blah, blah. Like, you have to have the knowledge, you need to study, you need to learn. There's so many things that are bigger for the rest of your life. So sorry about my internet, but I'm under the impression, and I've experienced that whenever you see somebody that don't assume that they know what options exist. Don't assume that they know that there's things that they're capable of that they're just choosing not to do. I didn't know that I had these abilities in me. And I agree that having a professor that Dr. Schaefer, who was my applied thermodynamics professor at the University of Pittsburgh, she's the only female professor I've ever had. And I went to her office and I asked her if it was okay if I didn't talk about homework, but just talked about grad school. And then like, she just poured into me. And so I think that being told that you have these options, being told that there are people who look like you. So to Dr. Higgs' point about connecting people, I think that is major. That's the best you can do.
Yeah, and just I'm going to piggyback on what you said, Dan, creating a circle. I do want to give a shout out to Dr. Laura Schaefer. She did a different type of recruitment with Danny. It's what I call a conversion. That is where a kid is going left, right? And she says, no, go right and get a PhD there, and convince her to get a PhD. And that's why Danny came to Rice. That's a different level of recruitment there, because you're converting someone who has the status quo, right? Go and get a job like everybody else I see, and you pivot them to go in a different direction there. And then when we create these strong pools, then I'm fighting Laura Schaefer and Dan Preston. Shout out to Dan Preston, who steals my recruits for this talent there. But Danny is a perfect example, and I did want to just kind of mention Dr. Schaefer, because she is right there with producing these people and pouring into them, as Danny said, with how they can exceed their own belief in themselves. There. So, thank you, Jane and Akila.
Okay, Linda Driscoll asks a kind of a related question, which is, how can we call students' attention to their potential to be inside the circle even before college or high school when assimilation is seen as a goal? What programs are especially likely to be successful? So I don't know, are any of you engaged in any programs or can imagine programs that you think might work to reach students even before they reach our classrooms at Rice University or before they're in high school?
Can I jump in on this one? Oh,
ahead,
Dr.
Dan.
Higgs, did you have a clarifying question?
No, go ahead, Dan.
Okay. So my mom bought me a science kit in the 3rd grade. So that was introductory. She was like, I'm the youngest of 5. And she's like, one of my kids is going to go into science. And so she bought me this when I was in 3rd grade. And so that kind of like put a little bug in my ear, like, oh, this is.
Uh-oh, is it only, now I'm nervous about my internet.
I think Danny, I think Danny is gone now. But,
oh, no.
But yeah, I mean, similar to Danny, I certainly had science kits there. But, 3rd grade, I got an A+ in math. 6th grade, so I said, I want to be a scientist and build space shuttles. 6th grade, my teacher said, people who build space shuttles are engineers. And then at 6th grade, there were all these pre-college engineering programs in the summertime there from the local universities. And so I was in those every summer. My parents had me in those every summer. And so certainly Rice could be across the life cycle spectrum. Those of us in the School of Engineering should have these courses. I lead the Rice Center for Engineering Leadership. We have a high school one. But in my mind, I know that we need to reach down farther, earlier into the life cycle there to have these programs if you want to catch them. The 4th grade failure syndrome is where kids begin to think they're not good at math. And it's even more pervasive amongst Black kids So you really want to have programs that at least start at 4th grade that captures them just before they say, I'm not good at math. Danny's back.
Yeah, please,
Sorry.
Danny, continue.
Sorry, and if it cuts out again, I'm sorry. So yeah, I was just saying like Penn State has programs I was in 8th grade whenever I did like a nano engineering thing. And so, but my point is, and I guess Dr. Higgs kind of mentioned that, is that the younger, I agree, is better. And so, but it was because of my mom, right? And so if you are running into parents who are thinking about helping their students or their children in school, they should just put things in the home that will help stir some of those thoughts and processes. That's all.
Okay, I just want to add that all NASB chapters have a PCI, Pre-College Initiative Chair. And so NASB chapters also should be involved in, they have a PCI chair, so they should be involved in pre-college initiatives. Also, I mean, I gave a talk like something like this a while back at Harvard Mudd, and I was basically saying it's the same thing we do for sports, we can do for STEM. We can recruit, we can target, right? And recruit these kids early. In the same aspect that they do for sports in terms of recruiting of athletes, we can recruit in terms of STEM. We just have to identify them and we have to be proactive.
Thank you. Really quickly, because I want to make sure we get to Elaine Eklund's question about service, but one of the attendees asks if for any of these summer programs at Rice or at other places, are there scholarships for disadvantaged students whose parents can't afford to send them? And I'm going to say yes, I've even seen that, but if you have more information.
Yeah, that's great. Yes. So we do have a fee-based camp, but we have a donor that gave a really good donation. So this summer, so we have like 350 students in our elite tech camp. Elite is emerging leaders in engineering, emerging leaders in technology and engineering. But this donor gave us enough that we have pretty much every kid in the greater Houston area that's first generation or underrepresented minority there. They get a computer and they get admission to the camp. And I think we had about almost 60 students now, from HISD and all the other counties around there. There's some other camps. Carolyn Nichols does a lot of them, and they're funded by the external agencies, which means that they typically don't have a cost on their STEM camps. The Tapia camp also is there, and it's usually covered by a school system, but it's also a fee-based camp that can give you scholarships. So the answer to your question is yes, either free or scholarship.
Okay, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add about like whenever Dr. Higgs mentioned a donor, like that, I didn't get a chance to answer the alumni piece before, but I assume that alumni want to give back, especially if they're grad students. So if the Black alumni group, at least at Rice, could reach out or follow up with some of the Black PhDs that didn't necessarily come through Rice undergrad, they would be probably willing to donate or whatever, because I know whenever I'm asked just to donate to like my undergrad institution, I need it to be for something specific. Like I want to know that where I'm giving my money is going to be the outcome that I'm hoping for. And so I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thanks. That's a great suggestion for that question about what can folks who aren't in academia do. So I really wanted to make sure that we got this question in from Elaine Eklund, because I think it's important, actually, especially for anybody who's listening who is more junior. So she has a question about mentoring. She mentions that VP Higgs said something about a Black faculty member saying, "You're crazy, you ought to leave all that service behind." And all of the members of the panel are doing a lot of service. What advice do you give Black students and junior scholars now regarding service? I mean, Dr. Higgs, would you say to the young untenured Black faculty member, hey, leave all that service behind? What advice do you have for non-Black mentors who are mentoring Black students regarding service to community and supporting students who are motivated to integrate scholarship and service and timing outreach and service in the course of the PhD. So this kind of big question about how are you figuring out how to strike a balance between doing things service-wise, outwardly facing towards your community, but also inwardly facing towards students on your campus, but then meeting the goals in that, Dr. Higgs had that circle, right? And meeting the goals in that circle in order to achieve tenure.
Yes, so that's great. And you're exactly right, Faye, to point to that heat engine. So I want to clarify, it was the level of ambition that I had in my service. The particular high school, I don't want to say it there, but they were struggling enough that the Urban League said, hey, young professor guy, you're going to burn up all of your energy trying to do what you're trying to do with that particular school. So we actually still went into the schools, but there were presentations instead of programs until I got to certain levels there. And another thing I did was I created a niche for service, so that when people come to minority professors with a lot of ideas, and my big niche was, look, I'm about PhD production, future PhD, minority PhDs, domestic PhDs, any PhD. That's my niche there. And that niche, of course, feeds into the bottom line with tenure, but at the same time, it allows me to say no to people. And so, yes, I'm sure Faye has heard me say something about don't do this or that until you get here, right? So, yes, I still tell people to limit things down to a niche until they get to power, like Faye, who is full Professor Faye now. Faye can do what she wants to do now. But yes, I would say that you certainly want to give back, but it needs to be very strategic. It needs to be in a certain area that's not overwhelming. And then you can add the layers of complexity as you progress up. Once you get the full professor there, then you have the ability to pick and choose. But you're no good to anyone if you end up helping the hood and then you have to leave academia because you didn't get tenure. So yeah, I still draw that hard line, but it's the level of ambition that you can come back and do that. Now I have big ambitions for that, and we do a lot. I have programs from the NSF for doing different services and things like that. But yeah, level of ambition need to be measured about it.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on it, just being strategic, because I remember I started a minority issues forum in the informs as a junior faculty, which is kind of crazy. Me and Mark Lewis at Cornell. He's at Cornell now, but he was at Michigan then. And it's crazy that we actually did it, but it had to be done. It got done. And in some ways, it was beneficial for everybody in operations research community. So if you're going to do it, right, just be strategic and how you do it and what you say yes to. So remember the Jim Carrey movie, Yes Man. Most times you're gonna have to say no, but your yes should be strategic.
As a Black woman in engineering, I was a recipient of Dr. Higgs' advice about don't do too much. And as we know, I did not listen at all. But I will say that later he came to me and he said, I think I get it. Like, this is how you will succeed, by being involved, by finding value in things outside of engineering, by recognizing what your other strengths are. Instead of minimizing those strengths, you capitalize on them. And then that fuels you to continue doing the other work that you need to do, that you're really actually in school for. So on the flip side, I agree being strategic is important. I'm not a professor, so I do not know exactly what that life is like. But as a grad student, even whenever you're in college, because those extracurriculars can get in the way of your studies. Whenever you're in high school, those extracurriculars can get in the way of your studies. If you find a way to use it as a way to fuel the work that you really do need to do to graduate, then I say jump in.
Thank you so much. Our time has come to an end. I want to just point out a comment from Monique Schenkel that our audience might be interested in. She notes that my Links Incorporated organization establishes NSBE junior chapters, so National Society of Black Engineer chapters for middle school students, and that her Fort Bend chapter has an all-female NSBE junior chapter, and the chapter also includes students who might not ordinarily be exposed to NSBE. So there are some organizations who are making inroads into the middle schools to try to encourage students to pursue STEM and perhaps even pursue a PhD in STEM down the line. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us. I would, of course, like to thank our panelists for sharing their stories with us and for being so generous and answering all of these questions. I'd like to thank the audience for joining us this morning and encourage you to join us for session 2, which will start at 10:15 on Blackness and future freedoms. And then again for session 3 at 11:30, which will be an update from the task force on slavery, segregation, and racial injustice. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for a great discussion today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Faye. And thanks, Alex, for organizing.